welcome back to Cards and Comics, guys. Sorry I haven't been able to make many, let's say, face videos lately. I've been under the weather, typical after the holidays, sickness, cold that you get, and I have it. So, working from home today, and in my lunch break, I decided, hey, let's make a video. It's a video I've been thinking about a long time. It's something that I wanted to put out there, and I've talked about this a little bit. I wanted to give a little bit more details as a hobby keeps going forward in 2024 around, this idea around, how money is really made in sports cards, and sort of the myth the hobby perpetuates versus reality. So, I'm going to talk about arbitrage. I'm going to talk about this idea of, here's the classic definition, which is a lot of times in the investment world, short selling or buying assets on one stock exchange and selling them on another exchange that has a different valuation. The Bitcoin bros would do that, between exchanges. But that's not really what I'm talking about. I'm talking about this idea of, sports card arbitrage, which has been discussed by other folks such as Jeff and his sports card investor channel. So yeah, like when I think about this topic of, how money is made in the sports card hobby, I want to just give you my experience and my perspective. So I've been collecting sports cards before grading existed, and before selling on eBay was even a thing. So there was the pre and post of hobby of those two big events. The arbitrage that's really happened in this hobby has come down in three main buckets. The old way, pre-grading, pre-eBay, was to go out and buy collections in bulk for a discounted rate. Some would say the classic way of doing it was to go to someone's house. Someone in their family died, left a collection to them, and you buy it for pennies on the dollar. And then you would, at that time, no grading. You would, if you were a dealer, you'd take it to shows. You'd have collectors and customers you would piece out the collection to and make a profit, and you would rinse and repeat. And that was a model used for a lot of years by dealers. If dealers had a shop, people would come in with collections and they would buy, and that, classic 40 to 60%, percentage, right? Now, that's, let's say that's the old school model, and that really doesn't work very well even then and today. A lot of dealers got a business. A lot of dealers would have to supplement their income through lots of other ways. A lot of dealers were not full-time dealers. They had to do other work to afford insurance, to be able to afford house and car payments, because there just wasn't enough collections and inventory to move like that to really pay the bills. So let's fast forward, unless you were someone like a Mr. Mint or someone who's just doing some kind of crazy high volume and could also find those truly rare high-end stuff, right? Let's fast forward today. So you got eBay, you got grading. So what's been the arbitrage that people have found since then? Well, the big one that happened with grading was immediately after grading started, SGC, PSA, BGS, there was dealers who their whole inventory or their whole way of making money was to find cards that were undergraded. I'm going to put that in quotations for a minute. Undergraded. And would put them in what the dealer's term, the right holder. I'll put that in quotations again. And so I've talked to, 4 dealers that are national dealers that do this for a living about, this process. Some of them started their own auction houses. Some of them have gone on to, major size businesses. Some of them are still small and just do it. A friend of mine does it on the side, but makes a lot of money at it. So when they talk about the right holder in this arbitrage in grading, is that they have to do whatever it takes within certain reason to get the card in the right holder. So this is where the grading and the trimming and the recoloring and all that stuff comes in. I'm going to tell you it's a gradient. Some dealers who submit under their own name, their own company, who have some ethics, won't go to the far, say, extreme example of adulteration or changing of cards, right? Doctoring, whatever you want to call it. Those things, those dealers will still flip corners, press, soak, polish, whatever, clean. They'll do all that because they feel like, and those dealers will tell you they have to do that to maintain some semblance of profitability, because just buying collections and flipping them for 20% more, you will not make enough money in the hobby to really subsist. And so they have to do this because, I'll give you examples, but, they have to do this because that creates the profit margins in real dollars, and not just percentages, but in real physical dollars that allow them to get insurance, pay bills, do things that they need to live, right? And this has been happening since grading has been a part of our lives. This arbitrage of people finding cards that were undergraded and doing something to those cards to either just resubmitting them. I've done it before. Look, I've got a 76 card SGC to PSA video out there where I talk about, just taking cards and resubmitting them to PSA. And in general, I made money doing that for a while until I didn't. And then the losses started to pile up and I quit doing it. Because there was just no real value in it. Not just because PSA and SGC values have gotten a little closer, but because the grading inconsistencies between SGC and PSA are so crazy. They're so inconsistent. It's just too hard to really to make it a steady, you just get lucky more than anything. I could look at cards all day long and I still may not get the grades that I was hoping for. So I kind of quit doing that. But I've known dealers, and if you're on the PSA forums back in when it first started, there was a pretty well-known individual who was kicked off eventually, banned from grading at all, even back in those days, because he was a well-known trimmer and card, scammer. I guess you call him scammer, but he basically would buy low pop commons from sets, and for people who put sets together, these really low pop cards. And I'll give an example of because I was collecting 61 tops at the time. The Jim Gentile, the Twins team card, the Pirate team card, Joe Gibbon. Those high number, low print cards that are in short supply in 8 or 9. This individual would just buy those cards in PSA 6, 7 grade, alter them, and then resubmit them to try to get the 8 and 9. And just over and over and over doing this until they got the card in the right holder. Eventually, PSA caught on. His subs, people would post, because in the old days, you could look at, serial numbers and piece together subs, and you would just find so many cards and subs that were rejected for trimming and alteration that it was just comical. But this person, when he had any success rate, he would take a card that was $60 and make $2,000 or $3,000 on a $60, purchase. That's what, that's the arbitrage he was working on. And that's why he could afford to buy 100 cards at $60 a card, and only had to hit on 20% of them and make tons of money. And that's what he did until he was banned. I'm sure this individual just kept going through other third parties and never really stopped. And, PSA, that's the game they had to catch, right? Was catching guys like that. And that's been in here since the start. But here's the kicker. And I mentioned eBay because eBay just made these purchases much easier to do and just kind of set fire to the ability to buy and sell cards, especially graded cards. So that's what eBay contributed, was it just made the purchase and transaction so much easier because you don't have to wait for shows and all the, hard ways to buy and sell before eBay, right? But here's a part that is relevant for today. And I'm hoping for people who, stayed on that, that so I know all this, like this is not your telling anything new. So the one thing I would say is that being in, companies and businesses and just seeing how companies operate is, no one in this hobby is interested in fixing the inconsistencies that create the arbitrage right now. PSA, to some extent, they don't want their grading to be consistent enough that they grade a card one time and that's ever it. Meaning that, yes, the card may get in the final holder on first try, but if it doesn't, they don't really care about that. If you have to grade it 3 times to get it from a 6 to an 8, a 7 to a 9, a 5 to a 7, they don't care. Because there's technology that exists that they could create a digital fingerprint of every card they ever grade and have it be flagged in their system as being a regrade. Possibly with alterations noticed. That's technology that they could invest heavily in. I don't know if they are, but they haven't yet. I work in, chemistry labs that do very similar things on the chemical basis. We talk about NIR, near infrared technology, right? That's been around for decades. They have similar things on the digital side. Maybe it's not quite as consistent, but still, they could do it if they really wanted to. They could knock this down a little bit. They don't want to. The dealers, for like high level interest, don't want them to. The dealers do not want grading consistency to a certain point. Yes, they want cards that are clearly 7s, 8s, and 9s to be graded that way. But they like it when a 5 slides in as a 7, a 6 slides in as an 8. They like the fact that there can be some alteration that goes unnoticed that they can do still. They like the arbitrage to a certain extent. Auction houses love it. So again, the industry runs on those inconsistencies because that's how you make the most money. The myth that we have in the hobby is that you can go buy a collection that exists somewhere that has all these really high-end cards, buy it for pennies on the dollar, grade it, and make a ton of money. That happens very rarely. In fact, I would challenge that the people who do those things, they don't pay an actual real market value for those cards, are assholes and scammers themselves. If you go to someone's house who just had their grandfather go, die, and then, try to scoop up their collection for pennies on the dollar, you're kind of a ghoul. That's not cool. And I think also there's people out there, who, talk about the dollar, the 10-cent card boxes and how they go through them every show and they pull all these cards out to make what? Hundreds of dollars? That's fun. That's like a hobby. I applaud that. But you cannot make a living doing that. Dealers cannot make a living doing that. They can't afford insurance making hundreds of dollars at shows. They got to make thousands of dollars every show. They got to make consistent income. And the way they do it is through this inconsistencies in grading, inconsistencies in how the hobby is regulated. They don't want any regulation. And all of this leads to how this hobby actually makes a lot of money. If it was consistent, if it was the same all the time, the ability to make a lot of money, if pricing, for example, if everyone knew about pricing, that there was no pricing inconsistencies between card to card, when you go to shows, when you buy and sell online, if everyone had the same information, the same knowledge, people who can use the arbitrage of knowledge wouldn't exist either. So think about how that, like, no one wants everything to be equal and the same, because the opportunity to make money in this hobby would be virtually nothing. We'd be back down to that 20% margin that, we talk about a lot, that exists in the hobby, 20 to 40%. And for most people, that's not enough to do the things to make a living at this, right? Then it just becomes a hobby for everyone. There won't be professional dealers, auction houses won't be around. Like, they have to make a huge percentage on all these transactions, or else they just can't exist. And that is, the same for these companies, PSA, all these companies. They have to live with this level of inconsistency, because that creates tons of money in this hobby. And so the idea that it's going to be fixed or improved upon, to me, is sort of the same idea around, some medical ideas, medicine and advertising, is they don't ever really want to fix anything. They just want to kind of slightly make it better. Because making it better seems like we've improved as a hobby. We're so much better than we were in the 1920s and 50s, and now, from a technology perspective, that we have to make some improvement. But we can't fix it. We can't remove it, because removing it, takes away the ability for a lot of people to make lots of money. And so for anyone out there who wants to really say, this would solve this 100%. Why don't we do this? Why don't we do that? Just know there's tons and tons of people out there in this hobby in very, very important positions that don't want it fixed, that don't want these issues to ever be completely resolved, because it takes money out of their pocket. It basically could bankrupt some of these companies in some cases. And so it's just never going to happen. So that is something I just wanted to kind of talk about. And I know it's kind of negative, but it's been going on for so long that I've accepted it into my hobby, DNA, that this hobby is like that. I kind of talked about getting ripped off, buying a card and it's not being real, is you just kind of have to take it. Like sometimes that's just going to happen, is you're in this hobby long enough, and then there's no level of knowledge that you'll ever have to protect yourself 100%, because the hobby just has so many things you have to know about. That's some arbitrage in this hobby. There's some inconsistencies and opportunities for people to make money, and they won't. So let me know your thoughts. Do you think this is something that's, like the idea that things can be fixed, and just completely taken out so we don't have this anymore? Or do you feel like I do, which is there's going to be small changes, and then this is comic books, coins, not just the sports card. It's all hobbies in general. But let me know if you think if I'm totally wrong. And I know it's been a little bit since I had one of these videos, so I'm sorry. I hope hope you guys are feeling great yourself, and I'll see you next time on Cards and Comics. Bye.